Hi folks, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney, retired, and a guy who just likes to try to make the law make sense for people like you. There's lots to get into today, so let's dive in. You're probably an honest person. You know that every April 15th, or thereabouts, I guess, depending on how it shakes out on whether it's a Sunday or a holiday, Uncle Sam wants that big chunk of change that he's been taking out of your paycheck. He wants that officially turned over to him. And let's face it, everybody hates paying taxes. No one really enjoys it. There are dozens of boondoggles and special projects designed by politicians to get votes that are paid for out of that money, out of your money, out of my money. When Senator X tells the people of the state of Y that he brought home the bacon for them, you can bet there is some silliness built into that. Consider, if you will, the city of Pelican, Alaska. Now, I wasn't even aware there was a Pelican, Alaska, and I certainly wasn't aware that there were pelicans in Alaska. But apparently at least one bird, a pelican named Pelican Pete, made it all the way up there. Maybe he has the town named after him. I don't know. But back to the city of Pelican. In September of 2023, the Senate was voting on bills funding a number of departments, including the Department of Agriculture, Veterans Affairs, Transportation, and Housing and Urban Development. Under the latter department was a special project being pushed by Lisa Murkowski, the Republican senator from Alaska. That project was a $4 million grant to the city of Pelican for a sewer system. Now, just for perspective, this is the city of Pelican as seen from Google Earth. Now, sewers are important. I imagine the Great White North being what it is, they're probably even more important. Nobody would want to stand around having to smell frozen poop all day long. But the money would have benefited the 98 people who are residents of Pelican, Alaska. So when you divide that out, that amounts to the feds spending about $40,816 per citizen for a sewer system, which seems like a giant waste to control human waste. It's just really a bit much. Wasn't Alaska where that bridge to nowhere was located several years ago? I think it probably was. Anyway, with people like this throwing around your money on wasteful projects every day, remember the $400 toilet seat? It isn't hard to be a bit upset about having to shell out thousands of those dollars for the federales to waste on pet projects. Sometimes people cheat on their taxes. Hard to imagine, I know, but apparently there is a lawyer, soon to be a former lawyer, who has just pleaded guilty to numerous counts of tax evasion. Some say he got caught and prosecuted because he's the president's son. Others say that the rule is that no one is above the law. So, irrespective of that, if no one is above the law, then it was appropriate for them to go after that. Now, if that is actually the case, he could spend up to 17 years in a federal prison. Now, prisons are not nice places. One of the most shocking experiences in my life was going to the Missouri State Prison, and I did that when I was a clerk at the Missouri Supreme Court. And seeing the living conditions at that prison, man, it was really awful. The walls were gray, the floors were gray, the ceiling was gray. The prisoners' uniforms were gray. I'm sure that if there was a way to make the food gray, they would have done that too. We all know that going to prison isn't a vacation no matter where you go. But there is a difference between tax evasion, which will get you sent to prison, and a mistake. When you hide income using shell corporations and do other things designed to make it look like you have less money than you actually have, that's evasion, and it gets you jailed. Now, all of us know that this is a risk, so the majority of people who pay their taxes do so not because they want to stay out of jail, but because they know that eventually, when you do things like that, you'll get caught. But there are some people who beat the system with regularity. I know a fellow, we'll call him Jim Bob, who has a business power washing houses. He charges $200 per house, which seems pretty high to me, but if you pay him in cash, it's $150. That's because if you use a credit card or write him a check, well, then there's a paper trail that shows that he got that money. But if you pay him in cash, there is no paper trail, particularly if he doesn't deposit it in the bank. Now, let's assume that every fifth house pays in cash. Jim Bob averages 100 houses power washed a month, so 80 of those houses pay by check or credit card, and he books about $16,000 every month in revenue. But 20 of those houses in that month pay only in cash, and he gets $3,000 in revenue off the books. He can shove that in his pocket, and no one's any of the wiser. At the end of the year, his total revenue, if he was playing by the rules, would be $228,000. But he can safely report only $192,000 because there's no record of the other cash received. But Jim Bob doesn't pay taxes on revenue, he pays taxes on income. So he also gets to deduct the expenses from his entire pressure washing operation, including the expenses from the cash houses, and that lowers his reportable income to $140,000. Now, ignoring for a moment the legal peril that this places him in, especially if he has employees that he winds up firing at some point, Jim Bob is paying Social Security and Medicare based on a smaller amount, and as a result, he's going to have a smaller retirement account with the Social Security Administration. So, in essence, he is cheating himself. And I don't think most people actually realize that. But let's suppose that one day, Jim Bob, who knows he has to climb a second story to a new job he's taken, and he's charging the people $300, he buys an Acme ladder. Yeah, the same ladder made by the same folks who supplied Wile E. Coyote. And just like Wile E., the ladder bends in the middle, likely from all the cash stuffed in Jim Bob's pants, and he falls 30 feet to the pavement, breaks both legs, injures his back, and now he's out of business. Jim Bob routinely cleans the houses of a couple of lawyers, and he asks one of them to sue Acme for this bad ladder. Investigation reveals the ladder was not properly designed, and so the lawyer takes the case and sues, and then he asks Jim Bob for his taxes for the last 5 years. Jim Bob provides them, and the lawyer prepares a demand letter based on the $140,000 in income he was making. And at this point, Jim Bob says, "Whoa, wait a minute, that's just what I was reporting to the IRS. I actually made $228,000 every year." Oops. You can't claim what you can't prove. And if you admit that you were lying on your taxes, how can the jury believe you when you tell them that the ladder broke? Maybe they believe you just fell off of it. If you lie to the government, then it's likely you're going to lie to the jury. So his lawyer is going to offer him one of two options. He can amend his tax returns and pay the IRS the back taxes, interest, and penalties on them, or he can use the amount that he based his taxes on. If he uses the amount that he bases his taxes on, that's much safer. If he amends, he has to explain the mistake, and he's probably going to get audited every year until the end of time as a result. And his explanation and the timing of the amendment will come up in the case. So in most cases, the income figure will be based on what he claimed and what he paid taxes on. So he has just reduced his recovery in his lawsuit by having filed false and fraudulent taxes. While Jim Bob here is between a rock and a hard place, some clients come to see their lawyers and they haven't worked on the books for several years. I know I've told the story on here before of the guy who hadn't paid taxes in the last 10 years. That was because he was deriving his income from unlawful means. He was basically hijacking trucks and selling the goods he stole off of those hijacked trucks at flea markets. His personal injury case got him nabbed by the FBI, just the way taxes got Al Capone nabbed in the 1930s. Now I know what you're wondering. What happens if Jim Bob gets his personal injury settlement? If he has a claim built on $140,000 and he had pain and suffering, a settlement of $500,000, $500,000 might be reasonably a good figure if Jim Bob can return to work at some point in time in the future. Surely the government isn't so mean as to tax the money he had to fight to get from the people who hurt him. And the answer is, in some cases, yeah, the government's not that mean. Internal Revenue Section Code 104 provides an exclusion from taxable income with respect to lawsuits, settlements, and awards. However, the facts and circumstances surrounding each settlement payment must be considered to determine the purpose for which the money was received, because not all amounts received from a settlement are exempt from taxes. The key question to ask is, what was the settlement and its corresponding payments intended to replace? The IRS has consistently held that compensatory damages, including lost wages, received on account of a personal physical injury are excludable from gross income with the exception of punitive damages. That's a case from 1995 called Commissioner v. Schleier, 515 U.S. 323, a Supreme Court case. Damages received for non-physical injury, such as emotional distress, defamation, and humiliation, although generally includable in gross income, are not subject to federal employment taxes. As a result of the amendment in 1996, mental and emotional distress arising from non-physical injuries are only excludable from gross income if they were received on account of a physical injury or physical sickness. Employment-related lawsuits may arise from wrongful discharge or failure to honor contract obligations. Damages received to compensate for economic loss, for example, lost wages, business income, and benefits, are not excludable from gross income unless a personal physical injury caused such loss. Discrimination suits for age, race, gender, religion, or disability can generate compensatory, contractual, and punitive awards, none of which are excludable under IRC Section 104. As a general rule, dismissal pay, severance pay, or other payments for involuntary termination are wages for federal employment tax purposes. Personal injury cases, however, often involve confidentiality agreements. Suppose you're in a car wreck and Acme Insurance is handling the claim for the defendant. And because you have been really badly injured, they're going to pay you $600,000. But they don't want all of the other people who are suing their clients to know that they're, like a slot machine that you could just pull the lever and get money. They want people to believe that they are going to, negotiate hard, and so they want to keep the amount of the settlement confidential. So they make you sign a confidentiality agreement saying you're not going to disclose the amount of settlement, you can only disclose the fact of settlement. In Amos versus Commissioner, which is a 2003 U.S. tax court case, the court ruled that a confidentiality clause in a personal injury settlement made 40% of the settlement taxable as ordinary income. The court reasoned that the defendant in that case, basketball player Dennis Rodman, not only was compensating the victim for his injuries, but was also buying the victim's silence and paying extra for it. The payment was held to be ordinary income and therefore fully taxable. So the guy who sued Dennis Rodman got a settlement, and the government came in and said, hey, that's not all for your personal injuries. 40% of that is for you agreeing to keep quiet about it. In that situation, whenever you have a confidentiality agreement, there's an easy way to avoid having to pay taxes on that amount. In the settlement agreement, the obligation of confidentiality is made mutual. Not only can the plaintiff not talk about it, but neither can the defendant. So if both the plaintiff and the defendant are bound to keep silent, they are essentially exchanging promises and not monetary consideration or money. The agreement should state that the consideration is for the confidentiality and it's the mutual promises and nothing more. One additional step you might want to take if you're ever trying to do something like this is you include in the agreement that you'd be indemnified and held harmless from any tax liability resulting from a determination by the tax court that the agreement was fully taxable. So that's the way that taxes generally impact in personal injury cases. It's a little bit further into the weeds than I normally go. If you want the truth of the matter, the course I took on taxes was the worst course that I took in law school. I hated it because the instructor, if you did the problem right, you'd get the same answer as if you did the problem wrong. That made it really challenging to understand exactly what was going on, but it fully fits with the whole idea of the tax code, which is a lot longer and stupider than it really needs to be. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all those things. If you have the opportunity today, do a kindness for someone, and then come on back down here tomorrow, join me at the beach, and we'll talk about something else. If you were looking to hire a lawyer, would you look on the beach? Of course not. You'd probably come somewhere like this, where there's law books, secretaries, other lawyers, people dressed in suits. Of course you would. Because if you're looking for law advice, you need to go to a lawyer in your jurisdiction, somebody who knows the law there and who can advise you properly. And don't construe anything that I say here as legal advice. It's just general content on the law.